power on.
The following is a presentation of the Sovryn Technica Podcast Feed.
You know, they say that 7 is the number of perfection. Now, whether there's any truth to that or not is besides the point, and I wouldn't dare say that episode 7 of Into the Void was perfect, but I thought it turned out pretty damn good. And if you're a patron, you're getting early access to it. If you are just a regular subscriber to the Sovryn Technica Podcast Feed, well, you'll be getting it, a week or two maybe later. But you're still getting this exclusive intro to the latest episode that I did with, of course, Sec and Penguin over at the Agora Podcast, our little sub-series that we've titled Into the Void. This was one where we just let it roll, and we've got, I really think we've got just a great flow going. As I always say, every time I do one of these, it's so great to connect, just with a couple of brilliant guys. And I mean, just some wild ideas get laid out. Now, the last Into the Void that we did, number 6, we got into a lot of geopolitical stuff, which is far from the usual crazy that we get into, but I think we made up for it in number 7 here, where we talk. It is all vampires and space Nazis, and I mean, we go all over the place. One thing that might interest people quite a bit, because I've been asked multiple times over the years to make my case. This might be the first time that I have at least started the process of making my case for the claim that I've made for many years on Sovryn Tech, that the Nazis never really lost World War II, or at least never really went away, and that they have in fact injected themselves into the power structure of the United States of America over the past few decades and effectively run the country. Yes, even right now, it's not just a Donald Trump thing. So you will hear, at the very least, the beginnings, a small overview of some of my evidence for that claim in this episode, and that might intrigue you. You're welcome to disagree. We have done, in fact, the previous episode of Into the Void was, a large chunk of it was based on feedback from a listener. So you can always write in, you can always email, message. I mean, the Agora Podcast guys have plenty of ways that you can reach out to them on Discord, Telegram, other ways. You can email me, q22@nwo.red, or use the Patreon only Discord if you're on there, to get into that, or to get your question in. And if you want it to be specifically for Into the Void, tell me, and I'll absolutely save it for when, Sec, Penguin, and I connect again. And I can say we've already got it scheduled in the books for when we are going to do number 8. So it's a lot of fun to just let it ride, let our wild ideas get out there. And one of the important things for doing this, look, there are a lot of podcasts out there that are not afraid to explore wild topics, including a lot of narratives in history, revisions of history, and so on. Okay. That's not unique. What I do think is fairly unique is that it comes from, and we'll talk about this at the beginning when you hear the recording of the episode, it comes from 3 different perspectives here, for one. Okay. You have a Muslim, you have a Jew in myself, and you have Sec, who basically defies all description. And so you have 3 different perspectives, really, that come together on this. But those 3 perspectives all come from a very similar baseline of anarchism, or personal liberty and so on. That's what's rare, is getting that very, and I wouldn't dare say any of us hold particularly hard stances on anything, but, coming from that baseline that is almost non-existent compared, relatively in podcasting. And I say relatively, it's not like, yeah, sure, there's plenty of, anarchist or libertarian podcasts out there, but compared to the amount of statist baseline podcasts out there, it's minimal. So this is a rare thing to get in the world. And that's why it's always a pleasure for me to be on it. I'm always down for being on it. And understand this, I'm not tooting my own horn and not necessarily tooting theirs. I guess in a way I am, but I get asked to be on a lot of podcasts. Most of the time with my schedule as it is, I can't make it. I'm always honored to be asked to be on certain podcasts, but I'll admit right here, there are some podcasts where no, I am not going to be on your podcast. No way. For varying reasons. And, basically because I think it would turn into a screaming match where they'd probably never even release the episode. And, it's a waste of both of our times. This is never a waste of my time. And, I am always up for this. And again, this is appointment podcasting for me, where I am going to show up, and I'm going to bring it. And I love getting to do it because I see such tremendous value in getting these different perspectives and for just letting it ride, this is the same reason I'm doing, Ellen and I, when Ellen's available, or if it's just myself, why I'm doing Sovryn Tech X, where it's like, no, just hit the mics and let's get this shit out there. And that's so important. And that's exactly what we do here with Into the Void. And I just love doing it. And it's a lot of fun, and it's always an honor, that I get to present it, in my own podcast feed as well. Because I do think, if anything, it gets you thinking. Existing in the universe is a co-creative process, and anything that gets your creativity going is worthwhile. Even if you disagree with it vehemently, even if you don't, necessarily see eye to eye with it, or, whatever, or it's just not something that interests you. But if it sparks that creative spark, which plays into that co-creative existence within the universe, it is worthwhile. And I've heard from others that that's exactly what this series and the larger work also, with Sovryn Tech has done for over a decade now. So I want you to enjoy. I'm going to let the whole thing ride itself out. Again, early exclusive for patrons, and then it goes out to everybody else. You have a great time, and I will see all of you, on the other side. It's all a lie. It's all
fucking planned obsolescence is what it is.
Yes, that it really is. If not on Intel's part, certainly on Microsoft's part, they're full of shit.
I've been listening to you long enough. I think they could just create a computer that would last for decades, probably, and just update it all the time. But,
yeah,
or if they made parts modular, where you could swap things in and out as they sort of break down. But
they are probably a lot less modular. Laptops, I guess you sacrifice some of that with portability. I remember back in the day, the gateways and all, like the big towers, and those are I think those are pretty modular. Mm-hmm. Of course, you sacrifice some of that, but eventually you can make advancements even on the mobile end. Maybe when it first came out, but if they wanted to, I guess the incentives aren't there.
They're making mobile stuff less modular. You can't even take the back off it now or replace.
Yeah, it was never really modular, but it's even less. You can't even get access to battery. Yeah, which right. I get kind of like you do sacrifice that, but like you said, you could potentially do that with at least laptops.
Yeah, there is a company, I think it's called the Foundation Laptops or whatever. It's something like that. And they do make upgradable, replaceable part laptops. They're pretty, but you pay for that. Like, it's expensive. But they are pretty nice to be able to do that. But really, it's all software is what makes really the obsolescence. The hardware, this shit really can last forever. Especially like even Apple's stuff, like those computers could go 20 years easy, and it's just the software that lies to it, and says, oh no, we need more power, when no, you're doing the same thing you did 20 years ago. There's no reason for that. It's just BS. Anyway,
if they wanted to, I would think they could make this software like, I don't know, upgradable, updatable, whatever the thing. Even if you had to slide a disk into your computer to like boot up new software or some shit, I don't know. Like you said, the hardware should last forever. You should be able to keep that thing going for years at least. I don't know, but
yep. No, there's computers that have literally been running for over 20 years, and they've
Right.
never even rebooted. It's all bullshit.
It's
Anyway.
like that. It's like that picture. I know we're turning this into Sovereign Tech, but it's like that meme where it shows like the refrigerator from like the 70s, and it's like,
Yep.
I am old as time itself. I will never die. I still run. It's just like things are getting worse as time goes on.
No, we had I remember growing up, we had a Maytag refrigerator that was from 1961. We called it the Guardian of Forever.
Seriously.
And as far as I know, last time I was in New York, which was over 10 years ago, but it was still working.
Probably still working. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably went through a few condensers in the meantime, but yeah. Yep.
Oh, sure. Running. Yeah. You got to clean out behind it and whatever, but man,
you're
not going to kill that thing.
No, it'll outlive both of us.
I know. Everybody's like, well, even me, like complaining, how does Indiana Jones survive a nuclear blast in a refrigerator? It's like, motherfucker, do you know how how sturdy refrigerators were at that time?
Yeah.
They could survive nuclear blasts. But
I just watched that, and I don't know what all the hate is. I know you're not a fan of the Crystal Skull, but that was Crystal Skull, right? Or is that
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? Yep.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I like that fucking movie. I don't care what anybody says. I enjoyed that movie. It was fun. I don't care,
We're back. We're gonna just go ahead and include this. So we're back.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been recording this whole time, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Why bother? Why leave it out? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who we are. You're listening to this, you know who the hell this is.
Agora Podcast, Penguin, Sec, Brian Sovereign.
Another
That's
Into
right.
the Void. Here we go.
Yeah. It was cool.
Yeah.
We just did one, and it was like one of those things where we always kind of leave off each void with more topics to discuss. Basically, more of the topics that we discussed when we started.
Well, that's how you know you're finding the truth. Is you end up there's more questions than answers. So anybody that does a podcast and like at the end of it, it's like, in there we solved it.
What's that old saying? It's like, I would rather leave my mind open to wonder rather than to find belief and close it off. Something like that.
I
can't remember the exact quote. That is exactly my perspective on everything.
Yeah.
I'd rather wonder than absolutely know. And once that happens, it's boring, and you're not open to new ideas. So,
totally.
I was thinking the other day, man, not to toot our own horns too much, although I'm not opposed to that.
No, it's not bragging.
Kind of like,
go ahead.
Yeah, but I think what I'm saying is true. We're kind of like Captain Planet in a sense. So like we create
let our powers
something
combine.
Great.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Like we create something sort of greater than ourselves in a sense. Because the way I see it is like we both all agree on quite a bit. We're kind of on the same page on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we disagree and have unique enough perspectives that it keeps it interesting. Number one, we're not all just kind of like jerking each other off.
Mm-hmm.
And then number two, it ends up like we keep sort of feeding off of each other's different perspectives, and it adds something new, and we go on to something different. And I think it really makes for interesting fucking conversations.
Yeah, I really like these. I think we hit on some of the most interesting stuff that I like talking about on the pod. I mean, you go into an interview and it's like, you don't know what you're going to get. Mixed bag. I mean, you might know what you're going to get if it's one of our friends, but it's like, so you don't always know what you're going to get into, but I always know that I'm going to learn a bunch of things and like have some really cool discussions anytime we do a void.
Yeah.
It's actually grown on me over time. Even more.
We actually surprised everybody and did a kind of mild, boring foreign policy one last time. We got to keep everybody on their toes. It can't be a wild, crazy ride every time, Sometimes we got to talk about serious stuff,
Right. Yeah. Well, what are we getting into this week or this month or whatever?
Well, do we still want to go into like libertarian history?
I want to. That can be our boring topic, even though I find it interesting, but that can be our like quote unquote boring topic. But if y'all want to do something crazy, also
okay. I got one quick crazy thing that I think would just be kind of fun.
Yeah, let's do something crazy.
So I kind of had, and this I might have heard this elsewhere. This might not be original to me, but I kind of have a theory about where the origin of vampires came from. So I know we're getting wild right off the bat.
Man, this is, I mean, swing for the freaking fences. All right.
Let's fucking go. No, it's actually way less like mystical or magical than one might think. So like, what do a lot of the famous vampires of history, let's say like Elizabeth Bathory, Vlad Tepes, they're all aristocrats, right? They're all nobility. And so like, I was kind of thinking one day, it's like, what if you were a commoner? And they were all weird, like Bathory. She's not the only one either. The thing with young kids' blood and doing shit with kids and it being related to the elite is very old. You see that over and over again throughout history. So if you're a parent, you're a peasant, and you have young children, I mean, what are you going to tell your young children to keep them away from the castle so they don't get kidnapped and used and end up in Elizabeth Bathory's bathtub? You're going to tell them there's monsters in the castle, right? And there quite literally is, but the monsters are always fucking human at the end, right? So I think there's not a whole lot of evidence to my theory here, but it's more deductive than anything else. But there is some reoccurring evidence with like nobility or elite doing weird stuff with kids and blood. So I think that's where the origin of vampires comes from. That we can go into like psychic vampires another time. That's a whole other thing. But actual like blood sucking vampires, I think that's where that comes from. It's just peasant parents trying to keep their fucking kids from getting like kidnapped into a sex or a pedophile pedophile ring of the nobility. I think that's where that comes from. Any insights on that, Brian?
Yeah, sure. Or Penguin, did you have something you wanted to get in?
Oh, sorry.
No, I mean that's really good. I mean that's like totally. I've never heard that before. That's totally as far as I know original. It's pretty badass.
Yeah, I think so. As far as my thoughts on it, believe it or not, I've actually thought a lot about vampires in my life. I'm a huge fan of vampire films for one. I've even written about this to some degree in the Sovryn Technica newsletter in the past, in the entertainment section. And it goes into mysticism. It's not like I'm just reviewing Dracula movies and I want people to go read it or something. It's nothing of the sort. Anyway, my thoughts on it are pretty in line with your Sec. I mean, I think there's a lot of times where, because you have throughout not just centuries, but throughout the millennia, because you have cultures and civilizations and empires constantly overlapping each other, what can often happen is I mean, and this is a fact, like we see it happen all the time over the years and even in recent history, where ideas will just amalgamate. They'll come together, even though they were once very separate things, and they all just kind of coalesce once the dominant culture subsumes everything from the minority cultures around it or within it. And like, I love that you brought up the psychic vampires, because I think that is a very separate conversation than the blood sucking vampires. Like those two things do not equate, even though a more modern concept of, say, the psychic vampire or of the energy vampire, as Don Webb would call it, would take advantage of some of the imagery of drinking blood, say, but it's really it's symbolic. It's not a literal thing. But as far as the literal drinking of blood, I mean, you listed off some of the historical figures, certainly that, well, as far as we know, actually did that sort of thing, or, maybe bathed in blood, Mary Queen of Scots, whatever. But the concept of the blood libel is speaks certainly to, my own history, because it's something that's been levied against Jews for just about 1,000 years now. I think the first case in Britain was in the 12th century in Norwich in England. And this idea that, drinking blood of babies and whatever else, and that this is used for some kind of mystical rite and all of this crap. Now, fortunately, most of these cases, even the more recent ones, say in the 18th century and 19th century, which, kind of speaking somewhat to our last Into the Void, also has not helped with anti-Semitism overall. But this idea of blood libel, I think, fits very well into the vampire mythos. And, not only that, but also a lot of the more supernatural aspects of vampirism would fit in with what's known as the wandering Jew or the eternal Jew, which would be Cain or Miriam or, depending upon the figure that you're talking about. And we don't have to get into those specifics. But this idea that, it was to keep people away from royalty or from nobility. I could imagine that that's done. But the ultimate point that I really want to get to with this, and I do think that there certainly have been cults and theological persuasions throughout history, not Jewish, that do believe that drinking the blood of children or of adults is, something that is life-giving. Even in a non-malicious sense, say in China, the drinking of menstrual blood is an incredibly common thing for immortality, or for what is perceived as immortality, or at least longevity in one's life. There's whole rituals that get done around this, and it's even more than just China. So the idea of drinking blood for some kind of individual benefit is far from uncommon. Now, the idea of killing babies to do it, that's another story. And really what I think that comes down to, it's evolutionary, or it's evolutionary, as well as, look, we still do this today. Okay, we don't call blood libel and say the Jews are going to come and drink your baby's blood or something, even though there's still people who say atheists will do that. Okay, and they'll put your baby like on the table for Thanksgiving, and we carve it up, and we drink it, or we eat and drink the blood.
Some people say Jews do that.
Right. That's not happening. And also, it's just a lack of understanding of some of even the mitzvot within, even the most ancient mitzvot within Torah anyway. But that's regardless. I think what's happening here really does play. I think this concept of the vampire, or at least one aspect of the legend of the vampire, does come down to we got to protect our kids. And we do this today, and it's not even about drinking blood. It's like, oh no, we need to peer into your, whatever's on your computer or whatever's on your smartphone, because we got to protect our kids. We got to protect our kids. We got to protect our kids. That narrative, that canard even has been used since the beginning of time, and in fact, it's part of the reason I said it's even evolutionary. The concept of the family for human beings, I think that completely came out of just an evolutionary drive to keep a little kid from getting eaten by an alligator. Now, that's a whole other big thing. And there's actually, there is a dynamite. It's in the believe it or not, coming out of nowhere with a movie reference, but Fast and the Furious 8. There's the villain in that gives this whole spiel about how the concept of family evolved evolutionarily. And I think it's just dynamite. It's meant to be seen as evil, but I think it's kind of right on the money in many ways. But that's getting into a whole other subject. But bottom line being, coming up with some kind of villainous, some kind of malicious creature, some kind of supernatural thing to protect your kids. Again, it's a tale as old as time, and we still do it today. We just don't talk about vampires. Instead, it's, pedophiles, which are very real, but, that doesn't mean the government needs to own everything we have. And I say that PWN, to be able to protect us from it. That's a parent's job, not the government's. Anyway, so there's a long screed. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think if you just have the most broadest interpretation of like sex theory, it's pretty much makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, it can be any level of nobility or elite, or just, guy that can maybe, there are all sorts of people that can kind of just with impunity do weird things. And they could be molesting. They could be like some kind of like sadist. They could be a person who just takes people into slavery and all sorts of things. There's all sorts of things, crazy things that we can't relate to that have happened to history. And I think that's, I think it is probably there is an idea. I think that it's kind of a person, as opposed to a lot of monsters, a lot of dangers out there, a lot of things that could be lurking in a forest or something. The vampire is specifically a human or takes the human form. So
Yeah,
there's that. So it is distinct from like, you know, some kind of like not a boogeyman, which is kind of a person, but like a Bigfoot type of forest dweller or something,
right?
Or some kind of bat. Well,
yeah,
some kind of actual like bat person or like reptilian. Yeah, I think. But it you know, he might be able to shapeshift into the bat in some versions of the mythos. But it's basically a person that has, you know, maybe the fangs or some slight features. But yeah, so I think that's as good of an explanation as any. I think I don't know. It's
sure
plausible to me.
Forgive me. I've only seen this name written, so I'm going to butcher it. Giles Laval. So he was Joan of Arc's right-hand man. He killed and ate like dozens and dozens of children. Just poor. He just had them kid. He was rich. He was a lord.
Yeah.
Had a ton of money. He just paid people to kidnap poor children and just killed and ate them.
Why would it be nobles? Because they're the people that can do it with impunity.
With the
that's the reason.
Yeah.
They would be able to escape. Right. They would be able to have like the place where they could do it with impunity, and even some people could even know about it, because, you know, I mean, when you're a noble, you don't cook your own dinner, you know, whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's wouldn't happen in any other context. So why would it be nobles? For exactly that reason. So I could totally see that.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, you know, this is still happening in some ways. Actually, this is still happening today, because you have so many guys in Silicon Valley who, okay, they're not eating children, they're not killing anybody to drink the blood, but they're hiring 16-year-olds who haven't smoked weed to come to their house and get a blood transfusion, you know, and replace, you know, their old blood with their young blood. I mean, I was just gonna say that. Right. It's happening right now. It's just they're not drinking the blood, they're just getting bags of blood and doing it IV. Right. And that still sounds batshit insane. Like, if you tell that to most people, I bet you they'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But it's been all over the news for like the past 10 years that like rich folks are taking like young kids' blood, not young, but young, but not children, like teenagers and stuff, like you said, and they're using it, and there's actually scientific evidence that it actually slows aging. And fixes various ailments in the body and stuff, and makes your organs work better. So like, that's the hip thing to do in fucking rich circles right now, is literally, I mean, they're not drinking it, but they're still ingesting children's blood. So this like never went away. It's just, it's different now. No, right. And this really is ancient. I mean, when you think about it, for example, you know, royal cult, or the cult of royalty, as we should say, you know, and if you're going to use Torah, we'd say it started with Nimrod, but, you know, you could pick your book. But one figure that shows up a lot, of course, from thousands of years ago, is the god Moloch. And Moloch did exactly this. He ate children, and it's part of what fed his power and his longevity and his supposed immortality. Now, I don't think Moloch actually existed, but there is this, you know, narrative that the royal cult, as it were, which you could apply that to any monarchy, the royal cult, you know, would do this sort of thing. Now, some people want to get conspiratorial and say, oh, you know, because that's like what whatever, the British monarchy and the Teutons and whoever else, that they did that, and blah blah blah, and spirit food and all this crap. And, you know, in some places there might be some reality and some truth to that. And if there is, I mean, then I think that fits in perfectly with your initial premise, your initial theory, Sec, you know, that, this is just like protecting your kids from royalty. And in one sense, it can just as easily be what I was saying, that, okay, we've always done this to our kids. You tell them scary stories to get them to do what you want, you know, or the state uses the narrative of, we got to protect the kids or something. But also in reality, I mean, it could have been happening because of this ancient notion of drinking blood.
I'll give you a modern example. Like, everyone was freaking out over that pizza place, right? Pedophile ring under the fucking pizza place. It's ridiculous on its face. And now you have like politicians like, oh, we got to break up these like sex trafficking rings, and they're just basically going after prostitutes and shit, right? Meanwhile,
all kind of nutty things with when it comes to that. Anything with children, honestly, people just throw sanity out the window. I mean, really kind of crazy. Like like you could be a guy like 45-year-old guy, software engineer, got a little bit of money. You're dating like a 30-year-old, and they'll be like, he's grooming her. They need to put him on a list or something, or they'll be like, if these guys are, there's a whole bunch of people that apparently are like liking or bookmarking whatever pictures of like people's kids on Twitter, and they might be people attracted to kids. I would assume that's actually the case. And they're like, why aren't the police like investigating all these people? And it's like thousands of them, and it's like, for what? We can put them on a list. You can lock them up for hitting bookmark on, which is it's creepy, but it's like, that's not how the world doesn't work that way. Or like, just the weirdest things are like, sometimes even things that are relatively innocuous.
Meanwhile, like a bunch of like rich and powerful people, it turns up they're pedophiles over and over again in my lifetime, and forget about Epstein. What about, was it Hastert, that guy? And then there was the other scandal with actually during the Bush senior administration. I can't remember. Was that it was a school? They were bringing in underage boys there. So like, meanwhile, like this actually happens, but they're going after like pizza places, hookers, and like some creep online. They're never gonna.
What's it called? Comet Ping Pong, and what was the other one? Some kind of pizza. Is it Comet Ping Pong?
That was the pizza place. That was.
I know there was also Planet Pizza, but I think that was Prince Andrew. But no, I'm totally. Yeah. And meanwhile, exactly this. That this. I don't know, something weird going on with Epstein. I still never really gotten to the bottom of it, but there's a there. I don't know if it's literally that, all the wealthy people in the world eat babies, but I think a lot of that's also a metaphor. But in this case, it's the opposite. It's like the vampire is the metaphor for people actually abusing kids.
Yeah. I don't think all rich people and powerful people in the world do weird shit to kids, but like when you're rich and powerful, you can do whatever you want and get away with it. So
yes,
it's for a lot of people that's going to lead you down to like all kinds of weird shit.
Piles always of been cocaine,
the case. Hookers flying around eating a bunch of like various foods, and for some people it's going to be like kidnapping kids. So it's like these people can just get away with anything. And what that is just kind of depends on their like individual personality, right?
Yeah.
Just because you're rich doesn't mean you're a pedophile. It just means like if you would have any kind of inclination towards that sort of thing, you have the ability, resources, and impunity to do so.
Yeah. I mean, so 2 points on this. One, I think the inverse might often be true in that you're not a pedophile because you're rich, but you're rich because you are a pedophile, because one of our strongest drives is our sex drive as human beings. And I don't think it's unfair to say that a lot of, shall we say, I don't want to, because look, pedophile, I mean, that's just fucked up, like straight up, I want to make that abundantly clear. Okay. But I'm going to say the word kink. A lot of kinks will become cults, will seek power so that they can engage in their kinks. And again, you say, well, what? Like, it's just sex. No, it's not just sex. Like, you don't. I love the old Oscar Wilde quote of, everything is about sex except sex. Sex is about power. I think that a lot of groups will do what they can to get as much power as they can, again, to either normalize their kink or to allow them to engage in it often enough. And I mean, I want to get into, I'm not like saying pink mafia kind of stuff, that gets into crazy territory. But I do think that there's something to that. The second point that I just want to bring up is, this is something I espouse, for many years, and that is, the quote unquote morality, which morality doesn't exist anyway, but the morality, quote unquote, that the bulk of civilization lives under, certainly in the West, in Western civilization, the people in charge, not just all the rich or anything like that, but basically the people who call the shots, the powers that be, they live by completely different rules. Yeah. It's the classic do as I say, not as I do. And I don't trust any of these people, like, I mean, and I don't just mean that in the sense that, the state is unethical. I mean that like these people, even in Hollywood, all of them, and I'm not saying all of them are pedophiles either. I'm just saying that they live under completely different rules than everybody underneath them. And I think the evidence is starting, like the cracks are starting to show, partly because of the internet. Not that I think that's a justification for the internet to exist, but it's a byproduct of the information age. Anyway, anybody got anything on anything I just said?
Yeah, one quick. Is there any basis for? I'm going back to the Jews getting persecuted for this sort of thing. Is there any like base? I'm not familiar. Is there any like
Sure.
Catholics have a blood right? Right.
Yeah.
Is there any basis for that in Judaism? Is there any kind of blood right?
Not with humans. There is. I mean, you do have the scapegoat, right?
Yeah.
That has to get sacrificed and consumed. But that's very specifically a goat. I mean, there's not even a debate around that.
And that's very common amongst
Right.
religion. Yeah.
I know enough anti-Semites to tell you that the conspiracy theory is basically, and it's a conspiracy theory, that actually today's Jews are the Moloch worshippers. So it's basically just that. And Moloch, and they really did sacrifice children, and they
It's still Judaism within the Judaism thing.
It's like, yes, to say they've actually absorbed it. So secretly, that would be probably how the more advanced version of explanation of how that actually works. Yes.
Yeah,
they're not actually Jews. They're actually Freemasons, and then they worship the. Yes, I've heard this one before.
Going back to, I guess, Nimrod or wherever the Moloch cult comes from, and then they actually absorbed that. And the Judaism, or the modern version of Judaism, is just a cover for, like, I guess, the cult within that sacrifices children.
Right. Yeah. So this gets into, because there is an instance in Torah where, or in the Tanakh more specifically, where the Edomites, this group called the Edomites, who are supposedly the descendants of Esau and are known by their red hair, the Edomites get subsumed by the Israelites. Now, this did happen. But this is where they want to lay claim to all of this, is that, okay, but then the Edomites influenced, the Israelites, and became actually became a secret Judaism within it, a predominant Judaism, and changed, and they were actually the Moloch worshipers and whatever else. And they're just getting some payback on Jacob for stealing Esau's right.
This is where the Roth comes from.
Yes, because Roth means red
shield. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm probably one of those, because my maiden name is Rothdiener, or my mother's maiden name is Rothdiener. And that just means Red Butler. But anyway, which is also kind of funny because there's a comedian named Rhett Butler, but that's besides the point. No. Anyway, this is where that idea comes from. And again, did this supposed event happen? Sure. Can people point at, as in, like, did this, supposedly Moloch worshiping culture get subsumed by Israel? Like that did occur. However, did the Edomites actually change everything within Judaism? No, like we have no real sign of that. I mean, and this could get into a whole other wild subject over the history of Judaism that we don't have to get into. But this idea has, like you said, Penguin, has been around for a good long while. And again, the evidence for it is, well, there's all kinds of reasons that it's just not true, but we don't have to go into that if we don't want to.
Well, there is some influence of Babylonian culture on, because that's where Moloch comes from, right?
Yeah.
Babylon.
Yep.
On early Judaism. Right?
Yes.
There's a
sure.
Bit
like
of overlap.
No, totally. I mean, when, for example, a lot of the holidays within Judaism were lifted directly from Babylon. This is a concept. It's called Pan-Babylonism. For example, like Rosh Hashanah, there's no Jewish New Year in Torah. It doesn't exist. That was completely taken from Babylon. So yes, that happens. Just like, ideas like resurrection and some other things, or not resurrection, but reincarnation, could be argued to be lifted from the Persians. So there is that. But here's the difference, and the difference is, So, for example, the common conspiracy theory, and there's guys like Chuck Missler who have espoused this, and he's fairly popular because whatever, he was a Christian that got super wealthy because he was part owner of Western Digital, but which, you know, is one of the biggest hard drive companies in the world. Anyway, so in those cases, it was, okay, the Israelites took over the Edomites, and then the Edomites, you know, were subversive, you know, from within, right? And did this. But the cases where, for example, like, you know, Babylonian culture influencing Judaism, which I agree with you, Sec, did happen. That's because the Babylonians conquered the Israelites. It wasn't the other way around. It wasn't subversive. It was overt. It was dominated. Same thing with the Persians, right? The Persians came in, and of course they, you know, Cyrus the Great came in and conquered Babylon, right? And I mean, an interesting point that I bring up all the time, most people don't realize, there is, you know, everybody thinks, oh, the Jews are looking for the Messiah or whatever, and then they're confused because they, you know, it's Christ, but they won't accept it or whatever. No, the Jews actually did call somebody Messiah, and that was Cyrus the Great, a Persian. So the idea that the Jews would take on some Persian concepts, A, they quote unquote got conquered by them by proxy because Babylon being conquered. But B, they had tremendous respect for the Persian emperor, which again, Cyrus the Great, who they called the Messiah. They called him the Messiah. Like the Messiah had already come for them in a very real way. So in that sense, it only makes sense. It's not something that's malicious. It wasn't subversive. It was, I would argue, an incredibly conscious decision, you know, on the ancient Jews' part at that time. But anyway, what else we got, guys?
I didn't know that they called him the actual Messiah.
Yeah,
I knew
they were.
Wow. Okay, I knew they were huge fans and respected him a lot, mostly because he allowed for like religious tolerance and different cultures and stuff like that, which is actually just that's how you do colonialism. But
yeah, Cyrus the Great let them go back to Jerusalem, and that's what excited them so much. I mean, I will say quick, there is a kind of a minority theory within Judaism that so in more not pre-rabbinic, we'll say pre-rabbinic Judaism, there is actually the idea that there's two messiahs. One is a spiritual leader, the other is a military leader. And there is a minority theory that Cyrus the Great, yes, was a messiah. He was the military messiah, and that now we're still looking for, or that Jews are still looking for the spiritual messiah. But that's a minority theory. And I think Judaism says something completely different about messiahs anyway, but that's another subject.
How much do you think that comes from Baphomet? For anybody that's not familiar, it's the merger, it's dualism. It's the merger of the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. Masculine being, at least in these terms, strong, militant, sort of wise, a warrior, etc., and the feminine being more spiritual, loving, empathy, that sort of thing, but combined into one form. Do you think that is more overlap, or do you think that's a completely separate concept?
Baphomet is an interesting subject. I've never really applied it to that as far as the idea of the two messiahs. I'd have to think about that.
I never thought of that before until you described the two messiahs, and I'm like, that just sounds like Baphomet and two different people. And then we were just talking about Babylon, obviously, so it all kind of clicked, but I don't know. Yeah. You would know better than I. So
yeah, well, I mean, I'll say quick. I mean, I've always attributed the Baphomet more to the idea of the Nephilim, like the giants from Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. But so that's why I say I've never like tried to equate those two, other than the idea of like this dualism. That I don't know how well that necessarily fits into varying theories of messianism. And again, Judaism has almost whole cloth removed that idea of the need for two messiahs, or like the idea of two messiahs. That's not popular today at all. But
so is it the popular thought amongst Jews is that the Messiah is already come and gone?
No, it
Okay.
should be though. But it's
Okay.
one of the things. So, I mean, I'll say this very briefly. Even post or not, it's not post because rabbinic Judaism hasn't gone away, but even within, after rabbinic Judaism became the dominant form of Judaism, there are multiple brilliant rabbis that espouse the idea, and I think this is the correct one, that there isn't a Messiah coming. There is a messianic consciousness that we all need to achieve. Abraham Abulafia, who's one of my favorite teachers in history, is one of the people who espouse this. So the idea of Cyrus the Great being the Messiah isn't a problem, because actually everyone should be the Messiah. And eventually, with like the Jewish concept of the Messianic age, by these interpretations, would be the time that everybody develops this Messianic consciousness. And it's not that someone's coming to save us. It's that we have to save ourselves, and that we all have to, kind of evolve and get to this point, which I think that's a far more powerful message. But, you're not going to get a lot of religious or religions or religious teachers to grok that, because then they lose their power. I mean, the idea that the congregation doesn't need you. Oh no. What are you going to do? You're going to have to actually go do some work. Shit. So anyway, but I think that's the correct interpretation. And
that
I'm not the only one.
A lot with a lot of other belief systems, actually. I mean, you could say that's the age of Aquarius. It fits with the Mayans and the New Age. It fits with a lot of different belief systems if you interpret it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's a really powerful notion. The idea that you have all the power, you the individual, you have all the control, and you can do all of this. And again, the reason that that's not espoused, I think, particularly, I mean, Christianity has really stuffed that one down. The reason that's not espoused is because it's saying, you don't need God, and you don't even need the word. You don't even need the logos anymore. And now, I mean, the funny thing is the Old Testament or Tanakh does say that there's a point where you no longer need the word. You no longer need the text anymore to be able to exist, within the universe in a co-creative way. But what happens is, if that's the message you're putting out there, then the powers that be, they're not the power anymore, because we are, every individual, every person in the universe becomes, a co-creator within the universe. And that's to any kind of authoritarianism, that's the most dangerous message you can possibly put out there. I mean, it's frankly, for me, the reason I call bullshit on Christianity straight up. The idea, I mean, it's multiple times where the Greek language in the New Testament is absolutely saying you are a slave to Christ, you are this, you are that, you need God and all that. And that message just does not resonate with power and freedom, individual power and freedom at all. And also, again, based on what I think the Tanakh actually says, it doesn't resonate with that either. So, but that's why that message is never really going to take off, because everybody, wants their guru, everybody wants their leader, and everybody wants this. And then the leaders want to be the leaders so that they can eat for free and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm rambling now.
Yeah. Kill your heroes, gurus, and Buddhas. All of them.
Yep. Shoot your guru.
Yeah.
Totally.
Seriously. Well, unless anybody's got anything else on this, I got another thing that's going to get us all canceled if we want to do that.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, let's go.
Let's do it.
So, do you think it's possible to separate World War II revisionism with actual Holocaust denial?
Ooh, good topic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, let me give you an example.
You're getting taken right off of Spotify, man.
Let's fucking go. Let me just give you a quick example. I'm not convinced that Hitler died in the Fuhrer bunker.
No, he didn't. Yeah.
There's a ton of evidence that says he escaped. Franco helped him escape through Spain to Argentina. There's a ton of evidence of that. The FBI believe that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's very
okay. Hold on. Wait a minute. What I actually haven't. I mean, yes, I've heard. I know there are. I know enough to know that there are theories, but I don't know what's the evidence.
Okay, so number one. Okay, let's start back at the beginning. The claim was by Germany over their radios that Hitler shot himself in the Führer bunker. That was a German claim. There was never any physical evidence. They found a body. The DNA did not match Hitler's DNA 30 years later.
After
They
yelling
found
at
the
his
couch.
generals and throwing all the pencils around the room. Yeah, I get.
Yeah, and the Russians were the first to find
that
him.
movie.
The body was in Soviet Russia for decades before anybody ever, and it didn't match Hitler's DNA. So, and the blood on the couch did not match Hitler's DNA either. It was actually whoever it was female, and the bones didn't match Hitler's stature. So there goes the only evidence we have. The only thing that supports that claim is the Germans claim that Hitler died in the Führer bunker, and the Allies, mostly because they wanted the fucking war to be over, just kind of went with it and didn't investigate very thoroughly. Eisenhower didn't think he was dead, by the way. And also there's a ton of you'd have to go into it. There's a ton of sightings of Hitler in Argentina. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, like Franco was running what they called the rat line, which was much bigger than they ever thought it was at the time. He was sneaking a bunch of high-level Nazis out of Germany, like years before the war even ended. And there's several eyewitnesses that place Hitler in Argentina in FBI documents after the war. So, like, there's very little evidence that he actually died in the bunker, and there is some evidence that he escaped to Argentina. And we found a lot. There's a ton of they found a ton of Nazis. The Israel. Well, I'm sorry. Is it the Mossad that hunts down the Nazis? Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, they were part of that. Yep.
Yeah, sure. They were finding them like semi recently, a few years back. I forgot what was his name. Was it Hess? They found in fucking Argentina, just not that, like, I don't know, it was 5-7 years ago or something. So
Oh, sure. And like, yeah, I mean, in the Angel of Death, when did he die? That was
fairly recently.
Yeah. I mean, maybe 90s. Yeah. I don't exactly recall. Anyway.
Within my lifetime. Yeah.
Right.
So all of what we've just been talking about is World War II revisionism, is the point I'm making. So, like, I definitely believe they killed a whole lot of Jews and a bunch of other people in concentration camps.
Okay.
But I think that I am not a Holocaust denier or anything of the sort. But I think that can be true, but also we're dealing with two states fighting each other. So we live in America and they won the war. So they're going to put a lot of post hoc justification to make them look like Superman, and they're put a very cartoonish spin on it.
Yeah.
I'll give you one more example that fucking blew me away. And this is me as someone who's been into history since I was a kid. And I didn't realize this until like 5, maybe 10 years ago. But the final solution didn't start until the U.S. had already entered the war. Now, when I was growing up, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it was presented in a way that the U.S. went over there to stop the Holocaust. Now, there had been mass killings. There'd been, property confiscations of Jews. There'd been horrible shit. I mean, awful shit. But it wasn't a systematic, like, factory-like final solution until the U.S. entered the war. But the way it was presented to me throughout my life was that the U.S. had to go to war in World War II because they were genociding Jews. And that didn't start. And the reason that Thaddeus Russell puts it this way, he says you had a madman with millions of hostages, and what the U.S. did by entering the war is basically locked all the doors and set the place on fire. And so it actually could have possibly caused more deaths of Jewish lives because of the U.S. entering the war. And it was presented to me as if we were going to save, we were the good guys going to save the Jewish folks. And it was nothing of the sort. If anything, the U.S. was more anti-Semitic at the time.
Yeah,
I would agree.
Yeah, more.
I think that's plausible.
Yes.
And
No,
I
it's
think you're
absolutely
right.
a fact. Look at the date that the U.S. declared war on Germany, and look
Almost
at the date that
simultaneous.
the first death camp was put into effect. It was literally 2 months later.
So I think we've either discussed. I can't imagine where else I would have discussed this, but I almost think it's one of the Void episodes. We've discussed, I think, that the meeting planning, so getting the approval for like the actual final solution or Inlösung of the Judenfrage in German or whatever, however you say that. That was. It's like simultaneous almost with Pearl Harbor, like very close, like which is or the American Declaration of War in Germany, which I guess was a few days later. It was in December 1941. So within days for sure, and that's weird. So it's like wait a minute. So it must have been on the table. It wasn't a novel thought. They didn't just come up with it because of what we kind of knew was probably an impending war or whatever, although, Germany was the one to declare war on the United States. But of course, they've been, basically materially supporting. They had practically been at war, I think, with Germany, basically almost a belligerent, just kind of like goes on today with some of these conflicts. So, yeah, I think we've even covered that. So obviously, yeah, it wasn't a total novel thought if it was within like a day or two of the outbreak or the entry of the United States into the war and the German declaration of war on the United States. But there is that theory, and I know it most from Thaddeus Russell, and you and I have talked about it, Sec, of, the United States entry to the war absolutely sped that up. Of course, we do have to point out that, yes, there weren't any, there supposedly were like industrial scale death camps. And like, regardless of what kind of camps and the details, there are a lot of people that are Holocaust deniers that have outright claims that some of that was fabricated. I don't know I've seen also reputations of the reputations and so on and so forth. You can go on down the line. There's been like 80 years or whatever to actually like keep doing this, or not quite 80, but heading in that direction. But of course, even before then, with the war in Russia and pushing eastward, there had been basically a Holocaust by the bullet. There had been like hundreds of thousands, I think, people, or I think Jews specifically, because that was the pale of settlement for the Russian Empire. When the Russian Empire was at its peak, that was the area, basically the area between Germany proper and especially Prussia or I guess Germany proper, and Prussia, and then going eastward before you get too far into Russia proper, was the area that the Jews were by law required to live, which is why so many Jews, especially a lot of less Jews now, because of so many that were killed, did live in that region, all the way from like the Baltics all the way on down to like Ukraine and that whole area, the Eastern Europe, the area right over the Iron Curtain in more recent history. So like, there had been obviously an intent to kill lots and lots of Jews, if you take into consideration that a lot of people digging their own mass graves, getting shot and pushed into them, and so on and so forth. Whether Jews throughout Europe would have been put in the gas chambers, there's a lot more denial of specifically the gas chambers and the industrial scale camps that were located throughout Europe and more closer to like Germany in many cases. And then Jews were sent from various ways, we know, and obviously in the boxcars. So from all corners of Europe that Germany had the opportunity to. And that's where a lot of the questioning of the numbers and the possibility. And I honestly don't know. There's
Real
all the
quick.
way to know. Yeah.
First extermination camp was Chelmno, opened December 1941. You want to know when the U.S. declared war on Germany?
Well, I think the Germans declared war on the U.S., to be fair. No, yes. I think I'm almost positive
they both declared war on
Germans
each other
declared,
after Germany
certainly
declared war on Japan.
What, the 9th?
Sorry, after America declared war on Japan.
The 9th, the 10th?
December 11th,
Okay,
1941.
And when was it
So
open?
that same month was when they opened up the
Yes.
concentration camp, the
I think we
extermination
discussed
camp.
this.
Yes,
think we discussed
probably.
it. But if that's the
Well,
case,
that's not
then
how it's presented to you in as a
no, they
young
let you
kid.
believe that. They let
What?
you believe that. They let you
Yeah.
believe that. They want you to, because this is what I wanted to get at. This is actually my actual thought. I'm just kind of reciting facts. My actual thoughts is that for obviously the now defunct Soviet Union and the United States, both post 1945 for decades, and in the case of the United States, and actually there's some of this in Russia. I mean, it was Russian nationalism and the Russian national identity, but especially within the United States, like the founding myth of the United States was the revolution. And then there was also like the Civil War, but the American Revolution. But both the United States and the Soviet Union sort of had these second founding myths, with the defeat of Nazi Germany and global fascism and the defeat of Japan and so on and so forth. The victory in World War II, the Soviets, that was everything that gave legitimacy to the Soviet government, all the parades, all the all their national most of their are a whole new swath of national heroes, I guess, for the Soviet government. And same with the United States. Like, that was the thing that started the Cold War. And so throughout the Cold War specifically, and then even after the Cold War, the idea was like, yes, the U.S. are the good guys, and the U.S. are the good guys because it was the liberal democracy defeating fascism, defeating the Nazis. And why were the Nazis so bad? Number one on top of that list by a wide margin was the Holocaust, the extermination of the Jews. So, I mean, yes, that's very, very important to justification of the United States government. It's the state, its policies, and especially its policies during the Cold War, which is very, very important. And of course, then you have these dueling powers, both claiming legitimacy from the defeat of fascism. And then you go on to, like, the Civil Rights era and the Civil Rights Acts and the different, these kind of the Civil Rights state and the Great Society and all the things that come out of both the New Deal era and World War II, which kind of meld together. And so this kind of founding myth, and now that we are also providing you all these civil rights and equality and all this kind of freedom, just kind of the polar opposite of what's depicted as Nazi Germany and the fascists and Italian fascism and the Japanese, which, yeah, those were horrible, murderous, authoritarian governments for sure. But I think, like, that's the kind of thing. And especially when you look at it in the Cold War context and also the post-Cold War context, like, it's super important that, like, America, G.I. Joe are the good guys, and the other guys were literally the evil bad guys, which, of course, that makes sense, but it made sense even far, far past the end of the war.
I blame Britain. I blame Britain straight up.
Why do you blame Britain?
No, let me.
I mean, I'm happy with that. Yeah, let's blame Britain. All right, cool, we were done.
Yeah, they're the vampires too. So, like, this is perfect. So, well, let me lay out some possibilities here. I mean, and a lot of interesting facts brought up. And I do agree that, yeah, like, we get a false narrative in America that somehow, we went into, that the U.S. went into, or attacked Germany because, oh, look, they're locking up the Jews, we got to go save them. There is no historical evidence. In fact, it's exactly to the contrary. And we've brought it up on Into the Void many times. There's no historical evidence that the United States was supportive of Jews, or, like, that they were given any kind of special treatment, or somehow that they gave a shit about Jews. The only evidence we get of any kind like that would be, I mean, in fact, ironically, well, 2 points. Ironically, the first Jew that was allowed to hold any kind of political office on a federal level, or on a quote unquote federal level, was the Confederacy. The Confederacy was the first one to allow any Jews.
Oh man, I was about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I mean,
like the vice president, I'm up to the vice president or secretary of state.
Yeah.
What's his name? I just learned this, but yeah, quite a lot of Jewish support for the Confederacy.
Right. I mean, that wasn't going to happen in the North. Are you kidding me? So anyway, but the only other spot that we have would be when Calvin Coolidge, president of the United States, when Calvin Coolidge was signing into law quotas for immigration. And when he did that, he put an executive addendum within the law that said, okay, I'm fine with all this. I just feel bad that we're not letting any more Jews in. That's the best thing we ever got. Okay, as far as Jews go, certainly pre-World War II, and I would argue basically up until maybe the 70s or 80s. But otherwise, there's no recognition or any kind of care whatsoever. In fact, it seems to be the exact opposite, that the United States in any way gave, or the United States government anyway, gave any kind of shit about what's happening to the Jews. So that narrative makes no sense, to say that, the U.S. went into World War II because they got to go and save the Jews. Well, what took you so goddamn long? We've been impressed for as long as there did in many thousands years before. There was a U.S. Do you want to do something before then? I guess not. Okay. Anyway, so there's that. Now, to keep playing on this, World War II is really, in my opinion, and it's not just mine, but in my opinion, World War II, like World War I, okay, World War I never actually ended. I mean, yeah, there's like an armistice day. There's all this, there's a time that supposedly it ended, but really it never ended. World War I and World War II are ultimately the same war. It's just that there was an incredibly long ceasefire in between those years. And now, as a narrative that I've espoused and believe in, World War I, its primary purpose was not to take out the Triple Entente. It was not to, necessarily destabilize Germany. It was to destabilize the Ottoman Empire. Okay. Now, Germany, yeah, right. We went over this. And so the Entente during World War I, which were, essentially the Axis powers of World War I as compared to World War II, the Entente was supportive of the Ottoman Empire. And we very quickly see when Hitler gets into power, some of the first allies he's garnering up. Now, he says specifically in Mein Kampf that, in fact, it basically starts off, we got to get the Austrians with us, right? They're our brothers by blood. And he also says in Mein Kampf that he wants to be friends with Britain. Why does he want to be friends with Britain? Because he knows if he can be friends with Britain, it won't be a repeat of what occurred in World War I. Okay, because World War I was effectively, what that war was the Entente, the Triple Entente, versus the Anglo-American Empire. And I say Anglo-American Empire because that means, Britain and the United States working together. Okay. So, and we could even take that back to the Civil War, because Britain was the only country that was even going to try and recognize the North being what they are, as to where, Italy, or at least the Pope and whatever, would recognize the Confederacy. But that's I don't even want to go down that road. We don't have to. So let's stick with where we are with World War I and World War II, really just being the same conflict protracted over a couple decades, or over a few decades. So what ends up happening is there's the very real chance that under Hitler, I do think that the Ottoman Empire could have come back to some degree, right? Just like he was placating well with the Japanese Empire and so on. But that's kind of, I don't want to necessarily go down that road either. Okay. So what happens during this, what we will call a ceasefire between World War I and World War II, even though, again, they're both really the Great War. You end up with Weimar Berlin. Okay. You have the Weimar Republic, which is, and you can read about this, and I have no problem with it. It was an incredibly libertine civilization, or society. Things were just, it was the Roaring 20s. As much as it was in the United States, it certainly was as well in Germany. Okay. And there were a lot of powers that be, them being religious or relying upon religion to keep their power, who didn't like that. In fact, I think the reason that Calvin Coolidge, part of why part of the quota thing, and part of the reason Jews were included in that quota might have had to do very much with what was being seen happening in Germany. Now, another point to bring up, I guarantee this will all come together. Another point to bring up is that eugenics was nowhere near as popular in Germany as it was in the United States in the early 20th century. The eugenics movement, this is also part of the reason I think that the quota system was brought in, and that was heavily influenced by the tremendous power that the eugenics movement in the United States had. There's tremendous books by Edwin Black that go into this. In fact, arguably, the very creation of computers really just comes down to eugenics. and being able to list off people. And anyway, that gets into a whole other subject. Okay. So, when you say, when people say, oh, well, the Nazis were eugenicists and, they believed in the master race and all this stuff. Sure. That's not unfair to say, but America, people in power in America, were far worse, in my opinion, even though maybe they weren't able to engage in a lot of the experiments at the time. I would not be surprised if Henry Ford was schlepping the bill over to Nazi Germany to have them go through the experiments. Same thing gets done today, right? When scientists in America can't do something legally, they just call their friends in China to do the experiments for them where there are no laws around that sort of thing. Okay. The idea that somehow scientists are more ethical in the United States is nonsense. And it's never been true. It's never, ever, ever been true. Anyway, so you have, this eugenics movement in America, you have it happening in Germany. And this speaks to largely what are the purpose of the concentration camps. Okay. Now, part of the problem, like where we get into revisionism or Holocaust denial, one of the greatest pieces of evidence for Holocaust denial, and I'll admit to this myself, even though I believe the Holocaust did occur. One of the greatest pieces of evidence is that you can find newspaper stories, reports where, 20 million Jews were killed or 10 million Jews were killed. And the number keeps changing until you get to about the 1950s when it seems to have finally settled on 6 million people. And so, Holocaust deniers will look at this and say, well, wait a minute, how many Jews was it? Like, it's like you're making this up as you go. That's their claim. What I think what Holocaust deniers themselves deny is that it wasn't just a Holocaust for the Jews. Okay. Where does the pink triangle symbol come from? That was, it became a major symbol for homosexuality, for gays. That came from, just like Jews would get a yellow star that said Jude on it or whatever, to label them as what they are. So they knew which, train car to put them on. Many groups that did not fit in with the eugenic narrative within Germany, within Nazi Germany, gays would get a pink triangle. Even Christian groups like Seventh-day Adventists would get a purple triangle. A lot of people don't know that. There were many, many groups, not just Jews, that were considered undesirable and were being sent off to Dachau and all of these other concentration camps. Okay. And this was happening, pretty like this was getting set up. You were getting labeled first. And then, say after months or years or whatever, then they end up, schlepping you off to whatever concentration camp. So, there's an argument that can be made. Well, okay, the number kept changing with how many Jews, it kept going down. Well, yeah, it's because there was more precision in the fact, okay, no, it was 6 million Jews, but we found millions more, but they were other groups. Those were gays that got off in the showers. Those were, Seventh-day Adventists or whatever other undesirable group that you could list off, that were sent off to these concentration camps. I mean, people like there's this over concentration on Jews in the World War II narrative. And it seems, and it's unfair. And as a Jew myself, I think it's unfair that the other groups that were that were also, slaughtered en masse in Nazi Germany, they don't get recognized. And I think that leads to a lot of the questions and also a lot of the blame and a lot of these conspiracy theories that, the Jews made up the Holocaust. See, it's the Ashkenazi. It's even in their name. The last part of it says Nazi, and all this, and people make all these wild claims when they completely forget that there were plenty of groups that were not Jewish at all that got off by Nazi Germany. And because if you could include those, then your narrative would fall apart for many reasons. Okay. But there's that. So I get moving, kind of away from that, unless you guys have any comments on that part, please feel free. Because otherwise I want to get into like Zach saying about, Hitler not actually dying, which I agree with.
No, I would just say that Nazism started in the United States.
Yes,
but yeah,
100%.
Go ahead and continue. I would agree with that 100%.
Yep, 100%. You said it so well, so succinctly. So, okay. Now, as far as Hitler not dying, and a lot of Nazis going away. Now, I mean, an idea that, and I don't think it's theory, I think it's fact. An idea that I espouse very much is that Nazism, like the Nazis never really lost the war. We know for a fact, a lot of them went to South America. We have some suggestibility that they went to Antarctica, or even other countries. I think that Nazism came to the Americas and then came to the United States. There was already an American Nazi Party anyway, George Lincoln Rockwell and some of these other, was that his name, right? Some of these other, the guy who wrote White Power or whatever. These people were actually part of, what they called the American Nazi Party. So it was in a very real sense here, but not only that, Operation Paperclip, a lot of people talk about that, but I don't think they talk about it enough. I don't think they look at the ramifications of that enough. And I don't think they look at the things that changed in the power structure of the United States once Operation Paperclip became a thing. And once you get guys like Werner von Braun, who was absolutely in the SS, and many other German scientists who get a complete pass for all of the, nasty shit that they did. And, if we even know all of it. Okay. But one of the
people
things
try to whitewash von Braun and
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, he he was just a scientist. He was just interested in science. No, he had fucking Jewish slave labor working at his factories, and he would shoot the slowest one every day.
Yep.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Scumbag. And he's like on Disney Sunday mornings, telling kids about all this stuff. It's like, all right, what the fuck just happened? But here's where it happens, right? So how does Nazi, because this is what everybody asks me when I talk about this. So how does Nazi Germany, how does that end, or how do the Nazis, how do they end up, subverting, kind of like the Edomites with the Jews, as the claim goes? How do they end up, taking over the United States? Well, here's what happens. So before NASA was a thing, the United States space program, and thus the development of a lot of aerospace technologies, which were at the time and to this day, the most important technology to both conquer another nation and to keep one under your thumb. NASA, before NASA was a thing, it was all part of the United States Army. Okay, like all developments in space technology, all that stuff was being done by the United States Army. Just like the Air Force, there wasn't originally an Air Force. That was just part of the United States Army. Now, an argument goes that this makes it more efficient, blah, blah, blah. But what I think actually happened here is that NASA gets developed. Why? Because it is explicitly a civilian organization. And none of the scientists and defectors involved, and it's not just scientists, there were also, military leaders and others, okay, involved in Operation Paperclip, were allowed to hold military office when they came over to the United States, when they were brought in by the United States government. So what they end up doing is they create what is ultimately an incredibly powerful, and certainly even from a mental perspective, as in they define our world in a very, NASA really does define our world, certainly for the United States. They create a civilian organization that does not follow the stipulations of Operation Paperclip and the stipulations that allows a lot of these ex-Nazis, even though I'd say they're not ex, to come into the United States, and they create, this entire organization. Werner von Braun was the first head of NASA. So that's how I think we get from here to there. There's very famous statements or from there to here, I should say, there's very famous statements that the United States didn't have a space program. Russia had a space program, but the United States did not during the space race. The United States had a Nazi space program. They just took the swastikas off the rockets. And I think that's absolutely true. Like there's nothing inaccurate in that statement, and it comes right down to the plans of the rockets themselves to prove it. So, the idea that, World War II revisionism, oh yeah, like we need a lot of it. It's not necessarily in the direction I think that a lot of people want to go, but the idea that, go ahead, Penguin.
Just on that point, I think so. I think you're hitting on the most well-known end of this, and I don't know much more beyond that, but you're hitting on Operation Paperclip, pretty well-known. Werner von Braun, the most, obviously, I think probably the most, I don't know if you would say successful, the guy that rose the highest up and certainly had by a long shot the most public notoriety of anybody that was involved with that kind of paperclip coming from, scientists coming from Nazi Germany type of deal. So the most well-known aspect of this, but I've seen at least like some instances of other of other similar things. So apparently like some of the earliest heads of NATO were, I think the first head of NATO, I'm not 100% sure. Actually, I should probably go ahead and look that up on Wikipedia before I come out and say it. But there were definitely ex-German World War II, general officers that were
NATO,
definitely were ex-Nazi Germany officials.
This is something
involved with NATO from the very beginning.
Right. Just quick to add on that. This is something where there has been great writing done out there that NATO did come out of Nazism. Like that has a Nazi history to it, like totally. And it's really fascinating to read. Anyway, continue.
So so it does. Yeah, I'm going to look up some of that to tell you who it was, but it was like several of them, and several are leaders of Europe.
I want to say it was the first Secretary General of the United Nations of NATO
of NATO. Yeah. So I don't have time to look it up, but yeah, there's quite a few of them, and I used to have a graphic on that. It was pretty shocking how much there was involvement. But yeah, I mean, you can imagine. So you have the Soviet Union rushing towards Germany from the east, and the Allies moving in from the west, and the Americans are supposedly democratic and liberal, but they're also of the right compared to and certainly the powers that be in Germany and in France, as opposed to global leftism, which whether you want to compare that to modern definitions of leftism or modern left-wing movements, but more the global forces of global socialism, revolutionary communism and everything, blah, blah, blah. They're the Reds. I mean, you clearly see that throughout the history of the Soviet Union. You have the foreign powers, for example, I was just watching a video about the Russian Revolution and all the powers that supported the whites to try to take out the Reds because they didn't want the socialist revolution to take over in a major country. So, once they were kind of racing towards Berlin, it's pretty well known that, Patton wanted to just kind of keep on pushing and right to Moscow, just with all that momentum, scoop up the remaining, remnants of the German forces, rearm them and have them head straight towards Moscow, I guess, carpet bombing them with nukes along the way, if they had it, I guess, which I assume they had a few, but having just, gotten the armistice or whatever, the surrender of the Japanese Empire. So at that point, it was pretty much an instantaneous switch of the blue guys versus the Reds, which is actually the Republican and Democrats in America were actually used to be switched too, but the Reds clearly being the communists in this case, and the forces of what would historically be called the right, the liberals and the conservatives and all those other distinctly non-socialist, non-anarchist groups. They are far more aligned, and they're going to be far more aligned. Their interests are far more aligned than the forces of what was at the time global leftism, which is real Soviet revolutionary, Marxist-Leninism, communism. Somewhat, which is to say that, so those. I mean, and you see this obviously with the division of Germany, the West Germany and East Germany. I mean, it's. In the division of Europe as a whole, the Iron Curtain and everything. So and NATO clearly had a lot of Nazi involvement. I didn't really have time to prepare to get that actual information out there. But if I can find it, certainly we'll put it on Twitter or the show notes, so we can honestly just have a discussion on Telegram or something. Feel free to join a Telegram group. But yeah, there's definitely heavy post hoc involvement, I think,
Operation
there was
Gladio.
a different. Yeah, I mean, that's just a small. Yeah, so blow that up. That's just like a small part, but a major part of, pre-World War II, and then immediately post-World War II, you have a completely different conflict going. You have a global fight between the Reds and the Blues, which is essentially, the left-wing revolution versus essentially global fascism, which there is something like totalitarianism at home, kind of more centrist, more. It is collectivist and actually a lot of heavy regulation on the government. Of course, what's the collusion of corporate power and the state would be many people's definition of fascism, for sure, or at least in that direction. That's coming out of the New Deal and the World War II mobilization and the war economy and everything. But then you have the way the U.S. policy played out for many decades outside the United States, which was obviously you have Gladio and its adjacent kind of stuff where they were blatantly supporting far right anti-communist fascist literal fascist groups and arming them and training them and placing them throughout Europe in order to act as stay behind forces when the communists rush to fold the gap and run through. So these people are going to be the partisans, but literal neo-Nazis at the same time, which of course those are the most reliable anti-communists. And you see the same thing play out throughout the world, through Latin America, everything else. I mean, there's the right-wing death squads refers to a real thing. People will talk about that now with regards to like supposed neo-fascist groups that some people claim exist, some people claim are feds, whatever. That is a reference to very real right-wing death and rapes and torture squads that the U.S. military trained at the School of the Americas. That's just the historical fact.
It wasn't just South America. It was all over. I mean, Eastern Europe.
Vietnam,
everywhere. Yeah, everywhere.
I mean, Vietnam is the best example because you saw how the logical conclusion of that policy, of course.
So let me widen. I think it's Gladio, but for everything. So I think all of this that I 100% agree with.
It was global Gladio, absolutely. With Gladio is like especially nefarious subterfuge kind of version of this.
And so was NATO. So let me widen out this lens, and maybe this will put like some context to it if I can explain it succinctly enough. So like I said before that the US Nazism started in the US, and I mean that like quite literally. Fascism started here. The US, you mentioned eugenics, that's the very obvious. You go towards the US's treatment of the Native Americans after the Civil War. They literally also called that the final solution. Nazi Germany mirrored that off of the US, but I think that European fascism and Nazi Germany and the US were actually ideological cousins. So you had the political economy in the and you kind of alluded to this, Penguin, prior to World War II and afterwards, really, in the early 20th century, we'll say, had a political economy that was very similar to like less so Nazi Germany, more like Italian fascism. So they were very much like Hitler. I think Hitler and Mussolini really thought that the U.S. would be their ally, because they were so similar.
I'm sorry. At what point did you say the U.S. had an economy similar to
the early 20th century? This is before. Well, I mean, you could say it teetered around the 1930s, but then it ramped up again for the war economy. And then that continued. So actually, you didn't get real deregulation beginning until the Carter administration. I mean, you had basically like it was a time where you had a fascist political economy, is what I'm saying.
Heavily regulated. You had heavily regulated. You had surprisingly, and I've learned this from like Cato. Like I think the price to dry clean a suit was like regulated by the federal government through like the
highly
70s
regimented,
or at least the 60s.
Yes,
heavily regulated government.
Highly regimented, a militarist culture, highly anti-Semitic, very biological determinist. A lot of eugenics was very popular. It was basically, if you don't want to call it fascism, it was fascism light, or it was proto-fascism. But there was a lot. I'm curious.
How much of this predated the New Deal? Because the New Deal was supposed to be the advent of a lot of.
I would say that's the pinnacle of it, but it started in the 1800s here, man. It started with the treatment of the consolidation after the Reconstruction era, the treatment of the Native Americans, the new nationalism. So the idea that
what was that?
The merger of the individual identity with the nation state started here. And then you had a lot of class collaborationist talk here about we need to like hone in the fat cats, but we don't want these socialists that want to literally like fucking burn down the factories. What we're going to do is now we all work under this nation state, and we're going to cartelize the economy and make sure it's all fair, and we're all going the same direction. That is literally that is proto-fascism. That's exactly what the fascists were going for.
Yeah, it's definitely this didn't happen by accident. Everything happens because of conscious decision and planning and policies to some extent, or attitudes. It could happen centralized ways. Yeah, it didn't happen. We didn't get this by accident. People were aware of what was happening as it was happening, and people were actually implementing it as it was happening. Yeah. So this is our long.
A lot of this comes out of. I think this comes out of like Prussia with this. Some of this stems from Bismarck coming out of Prussia and the Prussian PhD systems and stuff.
We've been supposed to having this conversation. We were supposed to have this conversation for the entirety of the podcast. We've always alluded to this, by the way.
Okay, so anyway, so the wider lens. So that's prior to the real rise of Nazi Germany and World War II. And the United States and the Italian fascists were very chummy. There's a lot. I mean, Hitler made Time magazine of the year. Mussolini made Time Man of the Year. There was a lot of overlap in ideology and the political economy at the time between these countries. It was very similar. And so
Stalin wasn't seen as a bad guy either. I mean, just to be fair.
Oh yeah, I'm not a tanky. So no, fuck Stalin. He can get shot in the head.
No. What I'm saying is Hitler, as he was rising in power, and Stalin for actually quite a long time. And
they were friends too. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe not the same people, but they were definitely not treated as horrible until after I think their time. Even on the far left, Mao.
What was the treaty between Nazi Germany and
Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact?
So yeah, there was anyway, so the wider lens, god damn it. Sorry, let me finish this thought, because I try to be succinct because it's kind of a lot to explain all at once. But all right, so before the war, the United States is fascist. Okay. And the reason they went into the war was not because there was an ideological difference or they disliked the Jews, or I'm sorry, they wanted because the Nazis disliked the Jews and the United States wanted to save them. That was not the reason. It's because these particular fascist countries, and I'll include Japan in that too. They're imperialist, obviously, but goddamn, and
they were they were like more fascist than fascist.
Right? They were pretty bad, actually. So, but the reason was they were also interested in not only fascism but autarky. So they wanted to create everything within their own country, and the U.S. while fascist, relied heavily on global trade. So it was again about profit. It was not about ideology. It was not about saving anyone. So if you accept this part of the pre-war, America's a fucking Nazi nation. If you accept that premise, then it makes perfect sense why the U.S. would just consume all of these Nazis into their own institutions because they fit perfectly there, and then arm a bunch of Nazis to go fight communists all over the world and rape and torture people everywhere because they're more ideologically similar than not. So that's why Paperclip makes perfect fucking sense. That's why NATO makes goddamn sense. That's why Gladio makes sense. And that's why the Nazis are probably still running the world, because they fit very well here. It was already essentially the political economy and the eugenics were already here. Okay. They were already fit. Sorry, rant over. I hope that makes sense to anybody.
After 45, so after two things. So first of all, after 45, you'd really the stuff you really associate with Nazism, the racism, the eugenicism, the anti-Semitism, actually all that stuff just goes away. I mean, I don't know if you could say maybe under the surface some people had but that becomes absolutely wiped away from it, completely anathema, like the worst things happen in the world happen. So it just goes away. But obviously the people didn't go away, and there's still a thread. There's a thread of global rightism, basically, and versus global leftism. And I think it's really kind of what we described as gladio on the whole world. And that's what, and it was like Vietnam on the whole world. I guess the two extremes are the subterfuge version is gladio, and the overt, warfare support, regime support, and boots on the ground warfare would be advisors turning to boots on the ground warfare would be the Vietnam conflict, which was just a completely most unnecessary. What I just can't imagine. Just when you just know the details, just such an unnecessary and just a war that just could have just not happened, but easily, but did.
Yeah,
which is a lot of wars probably.
Penguin. Brian's got to go in 10 minutes.
Okay, got it. So I'll get this really quickly. I'm not sure where we'll see. So, yeah, I don't know.
Let Brian have his piece,
please.
No, well, I mean, I think this is one of the most important conversations that can be had. I mean, like, there's lots of little nuggets out there, right? Where the person who even wrote in the United States, who wrote the national anthem, was hardcore socialist. I mean,
the pledge,
I'm sorry, the pledge, not the national.
Yeah. I just looked that up.
Yeah,
my parents actually.
Yeah.
Challenging, didn't have an argument with them. Here, let me pull up that Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's important to bring up. So it becomes a question of, so what are the Nazis' goals? What's the end game here? What was the plan? We're talking about, well, Hitler, likely, or I think it's likely, survived, and that his death was faked. And I'm not giving any credence, though who knows, to the idea that, people have seen Hitler in a UFO and all this stuff. I mean, I think that's kind of pushing it. Certainly we could get into interesting conversations around what did Admiral Byrd see, on his Antarctic flight during Operation High Jump, when he was supposedly surrounded by flying craft that the people who flew it, had a German accent, and there were swastikas all over it.
We should do a whole episode on High Jump.
It's a dynamite.
God damn it.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
And look, despite what anybody wants to say about, the bottom line of that whole of Operation High Jump is, because a lot of people say, the diary of Admiral Byrd was by his son or something like that. It wasn't actually written by him. Sure. I think there's, that's probably true. But there's still a lot of mysterious shit around Operation High Jump. For example, Admiral Byrd is in a short range plane, and yet he flies around for over 3 hours. Like, what the fuck did he see? Anyway, that's something we could talk about in the future. But as far as, what can we look at concretely as far as plans that Nazi Germany had? What did they really want? Was it the 1,000-year Reich? What was it? Well, the best thing that I can see that we have, and just to keep it weird here on Into the Void, is their most advanced, not the Glocke, but their most advanced rocket that they had was not the V1, not the V2, not the New York rocket, even though the New York rocket, we knew exactly that was going to be kind of a V3. The idea behind the New York rocket was that it would be an ICBM that could reach New York from Germany. That was really advanced at the time, but they called it the New York rocket because we knew where, that's where they wanted it to go. That's where it was supposed to, that was the target. So the interesting thing is that the next rocket that they were developing, and it got pretty far, was called the Mars rocket. Now, if they named their rockets after their targets, where the hell did the Nazis want to go? And when you look at, and again, this isn't ancient alien shit. This is the real deal. They were looking to go far beyond Earth. And, that raises some interesting questions. So what's the goal here? The goal is certainly a lot more than just our pale blue dot. And anyway, I'll leave it with that weird point. But if anyone else wants to get anything in, go for it.
That was fucking perfect. Space Nazis. All right.
Yeah.
We should do one on High Jump and like Space Nazis. That would be awesome. I'm totally down with that. Or we can go with a boring one next time and go with libertarian history, which might actually be pretty interesting. I know Penguin's down for that. He loves that shit. But
I'll tell a lot of juicy stories if we do that one.
There we go. Cool. I mean, it'll be fun. I like it. It's less weird, but it'll be fun. But no, I think we can wrap it there. That was a perfect ending. But
I think what I would say to some of the things up is a lot of the examples we bring up. Like the first thing we'll bring up something that's actually pretty well known. And let's say, okay, the general public. I'm not really talking about the general public. Maybe I'm talking about, IQ 105 plus listeners to podcasts. Yes, that filters some people out. Filters for some people. Yeah, at least on up to above that. But open set above that. Yeah, okay. But we're bringing up fairly well-known examples. So if you know a little bit of history, I mean, yeah, it's pop history, but it actually goes further than that. And it's not like secret history. It's not like like you said, it's not like ancient alien shit. There is a level of history, just one level beyond like Operation Paperclip brought Nazi scientists over. I mean, you know how many video games as a kid I learned that in? Like, that's okay. That's easy stuff. I learned about the Glocka from what's one of the video games. I forgot which one. I played so many video games about Nazis in them, but anyways, and they're still cranking them out. But which is very interesting that that's still so salient in our culture. But yeah, there's just one level of totally verifiable, maybe just a little bit of conjectural, but basically verifiable hard history that you can do about the 40s on through the present, basically, but on through the entirety of the Cold War in the 90s at the very least, where it's kind of shocking. Like, if you take the worldview, and I guess let's just go ahead and how do we kind of wrap this up with the libertarian view? At least I want to kind of point this out, that when I think about beyond like the tradition of the which I've been learning more about after what I'm about to say, the tradition of the old right and the tradition of the anti-war kind of conservative tendency, an anti-imperialism conservative tendency that's existed for like perpetuity as far as like modern political state, even like early modern political distinctions have existed, and that certainly influenced like Rothbard coming from the old right and like all that stuff, like 70s Rothbard and 70s libertarians at large. And this would cover just about anybody that would be willing to call themselves a libertarian. For the most part, maybe there might be dissenters as something that dead ends of the history. But what were they reacting to in the Cold War as radically anti-war, anti-colonialism, anti-coercion, anti-status people? They were reacting. They were in a Cold War. They're not living in our age, which is under different historical paradigms, current events, and as we experience them, historical paradigms. They're existing in the Cold War, and they're existing when they're taking their radically anti-state, anti-imperialist views. Which continue for today. So while like libertarian, like when Rothbardians take positions on interventionisms, even what amount to, I think you can understand what I might be alluding to, very popular interventions that may be occurring today. Why do Rothbardians take that anti-American, anti-U.S. government, anti-federal government, view on the militarism and foreign policy and everything? That principled view, it comes from just like the Marxist Leninists, and so have their reasons for this. They really do see this as like a global fascist empire nakedly, because historically it has like a continuity with the stuff that we're talking about. And it continued throughout the Cold War. And when you're living in the 60s and 70s and you actually know about the stuff that's maybe not getting out to the general public, but it's not some secret conspiracy theory. And when World War II was only a couple decades before, I think it's very salient from that vantage point. What was animating? Because we know it was animating the Soviet Union. We know it was animating the Chinese and the Albanians and whoever else was communist at the time. But what was the origins of this U.S. kind of global policy and global experiment? Well, you can draw these historical continuities, including things not directly related or predating fascism in Nazi Germany, and really come to some just principled anti-imperialist opinions.
Yeah, they knew what was coming. They saw what was coming, I think.
No, it was happening. It was happening.
It was happening then as well, right?
Well, and also anti-fascist, just to put it that bluntly.
Yeah.
Like, So, but very well said, Penguin. That was a
Yeah.
banger. Brian, we want to plug stuff?
Yeah, of course, to get more of me, go to sovryntech.com. Recently been doing a nice little sub-series of my own with my positively amazing wife, Ellen Sovryn, called Sovryn Tech X, where we just let it ride and we talk about all kinds of wild stuff. And we've been doing an episode a week, so I think it's worth checking out. I certainly love listening to my wife, so I hope you do too. Anyway. But sovryntech.com for all
those, I listened to those last 2 episodes. I really enjoyed those. Those were good.
Yeah, right on.
Very casual conversation too. It's just guys are just riffing off of each other. It's good.
Kind of like we do here. I like
very
that
similar.
feel. Yeah, I dig it.
I dig it. Well, anything else? You got anything else going on?
No, that's it for now. But always things. Well, I was about to say always things in the oven, but I'm like, ooh, we don't need to say that.
It's not the one to end this with, Brian. Jesus.
It doesn't help that I've been wearing a Kiss hat this whole time, and on video from the angle, all you see is SS on my head.
Jesus,
we're podcast listeners aren't going to understand this.
Yeah,
but
right.
yes, he has been wearing an SS lightning bolt hat the entire time. And you can every few minutes he turns his head and you can see that it's Kiss.
Oh my God, we're getting kicked off of everything. Jesus.
Yeah. So all synchronous here, folks. We're good.
Well, Brian, man, thanks for coming on. Always a blast. Everybody be excellent to each other, and we'll have to do another one of these again soon. I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. As soon as we get done recording this, I'm going to go text Brian. And we'll schedule another one because otherwise we'll get busy and we'll forget and 3 months will go by. So
right on. No, I'll be there.
All right. Thanks again, man.
Peace, everyone.
Peace.